Anybody who's heard this episode knows that my heroes are guys and gals that are willing to run towards the sound of guns. I love the military, not just in the United States, but around the world because of who they are and what they do for their country. But I also have the greatest respect for law enforcement because every day they put the uniform on and they're there when someone calls for help. And some of those days, there are very violent, very dangerous situations. My guest on this episode of Unbeatable is Alex Chandler, who received the Medal of Valor, the highest award that you can give a law enforcement officer for valor responding to a dangerous situation. And Alex is going to describe in great detail what he and other incredible law enforcement officers did when they were called out to a gunfight and an officer that had already been wounded. So sit back and listen to this incredible story from my guest, Alex Chandler, on this episode of Unbeatable.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Alex, thank you so much for agreeing to be my guest on this episode of Unbeatable.
Yes, sir. Thank you for having me.
Man, it's great to talk to you. I heard a little bit about you through a mutual friend. Yeah, so I should give a shout out right now to John, who helped get us connected. How do you know this guy?
To my Gossard, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I met him before I was a cop. Somebody I was dating at the time, they were mutual friends. I actually met him years before I was a cop. And then we actually ended up working at the same department, or I actually joined the force that he was on, and until he moved on to the DA's office as an investigator. So
you guys had you got a chance to work with each other a little bit.
Yeah.
Did he have any influence on you pursuing law enforcement?
I would just, making those contacts with people who are already in the job and being able to pick their brain, and get a better understanding of what it's like to do the job. Definitely. Combination of meeting all of those types of people.
Well, big shout out to John for getting us connected, because this is the first time that I've got a chance to get to know you. Yeah. And we're just going to learn more about your story during this episode. Sound cool?
Yep.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about what you wanted to be when you were growing up. Did you always think about law enforcement, or was there something else? How did this thing work out for you?
Yeah, not at all, man. Like, I never, probably never thought I would ever be in law enforcement. Just wasn't on my radar at all. Joining the military at a very young age, or joining the military, is what I decided I wanted to do at a very young age. When I was growing up, I was playing G.I. Joe in the yard, with sticks like they were rifles and running around the woods and stuff. So that's where, I ended up joining when I was 17, and I made that my mind up years and years ahead of that, so I had been, that was my path that I thought my life was. I thought, I would never do anything else ever other than being in the military. That's what I thought.
Well, for the people that are listening right now that don't live in the United States, 17 is absolutely as early as you can join. In fact, you need your parents to give you permission to join if you're still 17. I was just turned 18 when I signed up and still in school myself, man. But I didn't need my parents to sign for me because I had just passed my 18th birthday. So you really did love the military if you were signing up while you were still 17.
Yeah, it was my senior year. I was like halfway, well, not even halfway through senior year. I joined in November of 2010. I was 17. I did the delayed entry thing. It was like, I went straight to basic right out of high school. I think I graduated in May. I was in Fort Benning, Georgia in June, first part of June. Yeah. So that was right after school. But yeah, my mom was in the recruiter's office with me. and she
Yeah, I
signed the
bet she
paper.
was. And I bet she had some hard questions for you and the
Man.
recruiter
Yeah.
before she signed her name to that paperwork.
Right. She's like, "Are you sure? You sure this is what you want to do?" I was like,
Yeah.
"Yeah."
Yeah, you don't want to reconsider, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell everybody a little bit about the place that you grew up. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this name. Louisiana names are hard for me to pronounce anyway. So you're going to tell everybody a little bit about where you grew up.
Yeah, so I kind of bounced around a lot, actually. I was born in Plaquemine, Louisiana. It's a small city outside of Baton Rouge.
There you go.
My mom is from the Baton Rouge area. My grandfather lived in Walker, Louisiana. But my dad is actually from Conway, South Carolina, which is a very small town outside of Myrtle Beach. It's like right outside of Myrtle Beach.
Uh-huh.
And my grandfather, he moved to Georgia in the Atlanta area when my mom was pretty young. So I have had family all over the Southeast United States. And so I was born in Plaquemine, Louisiana, and then spent a couple years there, early childhood stuff. And then my mom and dad moved to Conway, where my dad was from. So we spent a lot of time right outside the Myrtle Beach area. Grew up on about 100 acres out there. And we moved to McDonough, Georgia when I don't know, second, third grade, I think, And then we moved back to Conway and then moved back to Georgia. So it's just been back.
So you bounced around a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
You went from small town to McDonough is a small town, but it's right outside of the massive metro Atlanta area, which must have been a bit of a shock to you when you moved to McDonough.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, we grew up I grew up on about 100 acres. That was an old farm. That was my dad's stepfather's family's land that they, farmed on for generations. And so that was like the best childhood experience I think personally I could have had. Like we had, I think, about 3 ponds on that property. There was a river that ran through the property. And
it's a young boy's dream right there, man.
Yeah. And it was, wide open lands, and it was crazy because my step grandfather, he had some work done with some heavy equipment, and they started digging up the soil, and they found something called cocaine.
Tell me they found oil.
I wish. But they
I was going to say, tell me you guys became oil barons.
Oh, no. They found something called cocaina is how it was pronounced when I was a kid. Hopefully I'm saying that right.
All right.
And
I have no idea what that is.
So it was like fossilized ocean matter, right? And so it's a very interesting thing that they dug up, and then they put it on all the driveways in the farmland. So not only did we have all these ponds and rivers and all this open area, I could literally walk down this half-mile driveway that was covered in fossils from the ocean and find seashells, shark teeth, all kinds of stuff, little black pebbles and stuff. And my grandfather used to tell me that it was fossilized whale poop. So I was like holding whale poop as a kid. That's what he used to tell me. I mean, it was just, living in that area was just a great experience as a kid.
Okay, so it almost sounds too good to be true, just having that kind of land and that kind of upbringing. But I know a little bit about your story, and I also know that your dad struggled a little bit while you were growing up. So can you describe a little bit of his struggles, but also how this affected your parents' marriage?
Yeah, so there was some substance abuse stuff, with alcohol and some drug use. And it was a very hard time in my childhood where there was a lot of abuse going on, physical abuse, the mental abuse. My dad, he seemed to be just very angry a lot, or frequently, and that's unfortunately in my young childhood days, that's what I remember, is that man being like angry a lot, and seeing my mother and father literally having like fist fights and stuff, and all the yelling and screaming and stuff. So that definitely took a toll on me. When my parents split up and me and my mom and my sister moved to Georgia, there wasn't a lot of relationship to be had with him for many years, and that was hard. Like, not having him, I think, in pivotal time frames as a young man, growing up into like going from like a kid to those preteen into teenage years, and not having him around, and then obviously when they separated, the memories were unpleasant. So not only was he not there, but what I do remember of my childhood, outside of the environment that I grew up in, and like the physical environment, the land I was describing, was beautiful. But the in-home stuff was bad and traumatic. So like I said, not only was he not there, but what I do remember of my childhood with him, a lot of stuff was bad. Not everything. Like my dad, I do want to say that my dad is not the same person today. Thank God. He is a good man.
Awesome.
Now, thank the Lord. Like, he's sober. Like, he's a great person. But at that time, it was not a good, conducive environment for a kid to be in, a young man, and then not having him to teach me things that I thought a young man should know at an early age, or just having that father figure to build that confidence level for you as a young man going into your young adult years, like that just was pretty much non-existent.
Yeah. And if you live with your mom and sister, then you don't have a lot of male examples. And I met personally many guys very much like you, myself included, Alex, that struggle to try to figure out what does it mean to be a man when mom loves you, your sister wants the best for you, but it's really hard to figure this out without another guy in your life that's showing you what it means to be a man. I have met thousands, literally, of guys like that in the military that are struggling to figure out what it looks like to be a man. And if you were going through some really rough childhood, then it's normal to look for a way out. And by way out, I mean, some guys will go to sports, some dudes will turn to school. But for people like me and you, the military is the way out of a messed up, family, messed up home, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So what prompted you when you joined the military to say, I want the Army and I want the infantry, instead of going to do something nice and easy?
I mean, I have some lineage of, some grandfathers and stuff that did some pretty cool things in their military career that kind of influenced that. And, man, just watching all the old war movies as a kid and just seeing like the action, the battle stuff, like that's what I wanted to do. I mean, I can recall when the movie Pearl Harbor first came out, and my family had that movie on DVD. And when the battle at Pearl Harbor happened, and all the boats were blowing up, and all these sailors were dying, and the planes were being shot down and stuff, right there, that movie was so long that when it was on DVD, you had to switch the DVD. Like, there was a second DVD you had to put in to watch the whole movie. And I can distinctly recall, like, when my dad switched the DVDs, he told me to go take a shower. Like, it was time for me to go take a shower. Well, where those DVDs end, where the first one stops and the second one ends, it's like right after the massacre. It's like everything's on fire. All of our boats are sinking. The sailors are trapped in the boats. And my dad's like, go take a shower. I'm like, okay. And I get in the shower, and I'm so mad that I just saw that happen to like our military, that I was crying in the shower at like 7 years old, like just so mad that all of our sailors just, were blown up and stuff. So I had the that's just always what I wanted to do, man. I don't know.
Either that was an intense moment for you, or you've got an insane memory, because I can't remember anything about that age when I was a kid. But obviously that scene from Pearl Harbor left a mark on you, man.
Oh yeah, man. Like it definitely left an impression for sure. That's still to date one of my favorite movies. So, but I still get mad every time I watch that part.
Yeah, let's fast forward. You join the Army National Guard. You go to become an infantryman. You spend how long in the military? Tell us a little bit about your military service now.
It was just over like 9 years and about 5 months or so. So yeah, I went from going to basic and infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia. Got assigned to Bravo Company, 2nd Battalion, 121st Infantry Division, and started out as just a grunt, just a regular rifleman, and then moved over to a grenadier carrying a M4 with a grenade launcher on it. And then because of my stature, I was kind of a bigger guy at that point.
Big dude, yeah.
Yeah, so I got moved over to the 249 SAW, became a SAW gunner, and then I had an interest in the machine guns and stuff, man. I loved that. I loved being a machine gunner. I like the old saying, you're the angriest person in a ruck march, but the happiest person in a firefight. Like that is true. Like when you get to let that thing go, it's incredible. And so I had an interest to move over to the actual heavy gun teams at the 240 Bravo. So I became the assistant gunner on the machine gun team, carrying the tripod and all the ammo and the spare stuff, and then eventually became the main gunner. So I was carrying the 240 Bravo at that point, and became a machine gunner. Did that for a couple years, and then I always had an interest in being a sniper. So I wanted to be a sniper, and we had a sniper unit, and they were having tryouts or selections coming up.
Right.
And the way it worked was the snipers and our reconnaissance guys were like in the same platoon, and when you tried out for snipers, you're being selected for either position. Either you could be a sniper and you go that route, or you get selected to be a reconnaissance guy. So I went through the selection process at Fort Stewart, Georgia, and I was accepted, and my path was to go down to the reconnaissance side. So I'd spent the last couple years of my career doing reconnaissance work.
Okay. For the listener who doesn't understand the difference between the National Guard and the active duty, can you just describe a little bit about the workload of a National Guardsman?
Yeah, I mean, when you're in the National Guard, you still have the same expectations. The grooming standards are the same. Uniforms are the same uniforms. The PT standards are the same, so you have to pass your physical, test that you take periodically. But you get to have a full-time civilian job and do, your National Guard duties. Supposed to be like 1 week in a month, and then 2 weeks in the summer. But when you're in the infantry side of the Georgia National Guard, it usually your 2 weeks in the summer turns into 3.5, 4 weeks. So right. All the standards are the same. It has its unique challenges because you're not on active duty, so you're not waking up at 5 o'clock doing PT every morning.
Yeah,
you're accountable for yourself. So when you're at home and you're a civilian, and if you're not putting in the work it takes to pass those standards, then you're just not going to pass. And unfortunately, I think the National Guard does have a bad rap of, not being up to par, but it takes your own self-discipline. Nobody's going to wake you up at 5 o'clock every morning and tell you to go run. Like you got to do that on your own. So there's a lot of good soldiers in the National Guard, and it's a unique challenge in itself. The National Guard, they still forward deploy to battles, and they support a lot of things. And then there's the national disaster side of the house too. So if I've been a part of some hurricane efforts that have hit like Savannah and the coastal side of Georgia, and we've gone down there and we're activated to help do anything, clear trees out of the roadways and pass out. People didn't have fresh running water, so we were able to provide that to them, or help provide that to them. So you get to do, you have the opportunity to do a lot of good in the National Guard as well.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, I served with National Guardsmen right around me, even in some of the most intense special operations units in the world. There were some National Guardsmen that were kind of with us and helped support us. And I have the greatest respect for them because, as you just described, you've got a full-time job for the most part, Monday through Friday. But then 1 week into the month, you're now you're in the military and you're serving as a soldier. Then you go back to your civilian job until there's a crisis. Crisis could be in your state where you show up and help out in a natural disaster, can be a international crisis, and they activate you and send you overseas as part of the U.S. military. And the reason I have the greatest respect for the Guard is because you have to do both, and you have to do both really, really well. And that's not easy to do. The National Guard can get a bad name with some people, but not with me, man. I've got the greatest respect for what we would call weekend warriors that are really, really good warriors during the weekend and then really good at what they do during the week. It's not an easy life.
And it was pretty cool that, the Guard brings so many people from so many different backgrounds together.
Yeah.
The Army, active duty does too, but you have like entrepreneurs in the National Guard. So, you have all kinds of walks of life that come into the National Guard for all different types of reasons. So like I know people that own tree companies. So if I need a tree service, like I have a guy to call, I know people to call.
Yeah.
If I know people that are plumbers or own plumber businesses and like all kinds of stuff, man. It's incredible how much, and then when you're in a situation like, you go down to help out some of this national disaster stuff, and you have people who own tree companies. So not only can they provide services as a National Guardman, but they own tree companies. So we're going.
They know a thing or two about this. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just cool how it brings all that kind of stuff together collectively.
Well, obviously you're a guy who likes guns. And this is not just obvious from your time in the National Guard, but it's also pretty obvious from what you did in law enforcement. So now let's talk this side of your life. When did the law enforcement piece start for you? Because you were in the National Guard from basically graduating high school for the next 10 years. When did you start going down the road of becoming a police officer?
So 2014, I got hired on with Clayton County and started that journey. I was 20 years old. I turned 21 right before the academy started, the police
Impressive.
Academy. And started doing that. And I'm coming up on my 9-year mark with the county, so almost a decade, another decade.
All right.
And graduated the police academy that November of 2014, and went out to being a cop. Into my field training phase where
I'm writing this down. So you finished the police academy November 2014, and just kind of briefly describe what happens with your law enforcement career for the next couple of years.
So I work patrol, answering 911 calls for a couple years, and I moved over to our gang unit, so our gang investigative unit and crime suppression unit. So we were, tasked with being proactive and proactively seeking out to find, criminal activity before either the crime happens or, after it happens and things like that. And so you go from answering, people in need of help calls to
Right.
trying to find people who are victimizing society. So I got a lot of fulfillment out of that.
Yeah.
In 2021, 2021, I tried out for our SWAT team and successfully went through that selection process, tryout phase. Was selected to go into the SWAT team and started training. I've been through a lot of training. I've met a lot of people.
Sounds like it, man.
Been training all over the country with SWAT. I mean, that opened up so many doors for me. I got into explosive breaching. So now I have my basic and advanced level explosive breaching.
All right.
So now we have a couple people on the team that are explosive breachers.
Yeah.
So that's usually breaching is usually my main goal when we hit a search warrant or something like that is I like being the breacher, and usually I'm selected to be the breacher a lot of the time. So I get to carry that big ram and smack a door with it. So
that's right. That's smashing indoors.
Yeah, that's always fun.
There's plenty of viewers that are familiar with the letters SWAT. They may not recognize that it stands for Special Weapons and Tactics, but they don't know the difference between a beat cop and a SWAT team. So can you describe how much life is different on a SWAT team than the average police officer that's responding to a 911 call or even doing crime suppression?
Yeah, I mean, being on SWAT, we're on call 24/7. So even when we're not at work, we're tied to a phone, our work phone. So whenever we have a saying that when the police need help, they call the SWAT team. So, you know, when I'm at home enjoying time with my family and my kids and stuff, and that phone goes off, and you know it's time to go to work, and you got to go from being a dad to going into an environment where, we're usually, not always, but usually when we're called out like that, usually there's gunshots that have either already been fired by a suspect, or when we show up, they're going to be fired at us by a suspect. So like I said, you're on call 24/7, 365 days a year. I mean, you do get to have vacations and stuff, but you know, you gotta kind of give the team a heads up, like, hey, I'm gonna be out of pocket for the weekend or whatever. So it's not like you're just stuck and you can't do anything. You can enjoy life, but you're on call 24/7, and we train once a week together. So we get a lot of training in. We get a lot of shooting in, so we're very proficient at shooting and marksmanship and just overall tactics. We get to train together a lot.
Yeah.
So it can be very stressful. I mean, you're going into some very stressful environments, a lot of unknowns. You know, you're going into someone else's house. You don't know what's in that house, and there could be booby traps, and those things to think about. Like in America, people booby trapping their houses and stuff. You're like, man, there was no way that would happen there. But we've literally had search warrants where we've found grenades in houses, like live, hand grenades and stuff. And so we've taken fire a lot since I've been on the team. We've been shot at probably, I don't know, if I had to guess, maybe 6 or 7 times I've been shot at since I've been just on the SWAT team, in the, almost 2 years now. So it's just it can be a very stressful life, in those environments.
Well, so that's what I wanted the listener to hear. I have the absolute greatest respect for all law enforcement officers, because freedom doesn't work if there's not men and women who are willing to defend our rights and to protect us against bad people. Those men and women are the law enforcement officers that serve every day without even being noticed until you need them until you have a crisis and you pick up the phone and you dial 911. But when SWAT gets called, it's usually not good. It's usually really, really bad. And even the law enforcement officers know, man, if we have to get SWAT involved, it's really ugly. Yeah. So but I'd love for you to describe for a second what this is like for your family, man, because every day you go to work, it's hard on them not knowing whether or not my husband or my dad's coming home.
Yeah. And, I've had some close calls at work, where
obviously
I've been in some situations where, number of situations where I'm like, this might be the one, this might be the one that gets me. And,
that I don't walk away from, right?
Yeah. And so we've had some things hit very close to home, that's just shaken up our household. And so, yeah, every day that I walk out the door, and get to come home, it's a blessing. It's a blessing to me and my family, and definitely appreciate being able to come home and wake up every morning and come back home to the kids and the wife and everything. Yeah.
So, describe your family for just a second to everybody.
So I have my son. He'll be 5 in June, and
all right.
I have a stepdaughter who's 8, and then my wife.
Okay. All right. And how long you and your wife been married?
Oh, well, we've been together. We started dating right before I made SWAT in 2020. So we've been together since 2020.
All of this was to just build up. Now that the listeners know he's got a family, he's got people that are looking up to him. He goes in when even other police officers are not going in. That's part of the role of being a SWAT officer. And you've already said you don't know what you're going into. There could be booby traps. There could be a lot of bad guys. There could be a lot of bullets tonight on this target when SWAT gets called out. Let's talk about November 2021. Let's talk about when you got called out to Rex, Georgia. And why don't you just take it over from here, Alex, and describe what happens during this call and how it goes down?
Yeah, so November 30th, 2020, 2021, I was on a crime suppression team with one of my best friends, and we were at work that day. We were having a pretty good day, man. We found a stolen car and some stolen guns in the car and everything, and there were some drugs in the car or whatever. Wow. So we had a pretty successful start to our shift. Like, that was the first thing that happened. Is 30 minutes into our shift, we found this stolen car that's got stolen guns and drugs and stuff. So it was a pretty successful start to the day, and it just felt like a pretty normal day. We were having a pretty good day, and so at one point, I was on the way to the jail with someone that had an outstanding warrant, and I was taking them down to the jail, and the initial call came over the radio to the patrol officers of reports that somebody had been shot, and the inmate that was in the back of my car, he started asking me like what this signal and what these codes mean and stuff.
Yeah,
and,
right.
And I just kind of felt uncomfortable with telling people our signals and codes, because you don't. That's just in something in our profession.
None of their business, really right?
Yeah, so you don't really want that to happen. So, I just like, something bad happens, and then I turned my radio down. So that way he wasn't listening, and I didn't have to further explain what more codes and signals and stuff meant and everything. So I was kind of oblivious to the call initially, because I was otherwise doing something. And so I get down to the jail, and there's like 3 officers that were on patrol officers that were like running out of the Sally port. And I'm like, what? I'm pulling up in my patrol car, and I'm like,
they're running out, running away, right?
Yeah, I'm like, what are they doing? So I get out of the car. I'm like, I knew who they were. So I'm like, hey, what's going on? They're like, hey, we gotta go. Officer needs help. Shots fired, whatever. And I'm like, oh snap! Like, this is okay. Something serious is happening. But I have this guy in my car, and I can't just like I have to. So our Sally port is outside. Like, I have to get this guy in the jail and secure him because he needs to go to jail. Pause for
just a second. Tell everybody what a Sally port is, because many people don't recognize that term.
Yeah, so the Sally port is the area of the jail that an officer or a deputy would drive into to bring someone in the jail. It's like it's a secure part of the jail that you bring people into the jail, and it can work in different ways. Ours is an open area that's like a brick wall that has, like razor wire around the top. Some other places is like a roll-up garage door, and you drive your car into, and the door closes behind you. It's a little more secure or whatever. But it's the point before you actually get into the jail, in the beginning stages of where the processing happens. And so ours is set up where, like I said, it's like an outside. There's a overhang, just so you pull underneath the overhang when it's raining. That's nice to have. You're not getting rain on when you get out of the car. And then there's like sliding doors on this brick wall. And so you go to the door opens automatically because someone's in a control tower. They can see you on the camera there. They hit the button, the door opens, and then you walk in the jail, and then you bring them into like the intake holding area, drop your paperwork off. Yeah. They get searched and everything. So I'm like, okay, something serious is happening. I got to get this guy inside the jail. So I'd already been to the jail once, so I knew who the intake deputy was. He was a certified deputy that was working overtime in the intake. So I'm walking up to the door opens, and he comes running out, and he's the one working intake. So now I'm like, the intake officer.
So now everybody's running away, right?
Yeah, so everyone's running out of the jail, and he's telling me, hey, come on, we gotta go. And I'm like, I know, but like, what do I do with this guy, And so he's like, just put the paperwork on the table and let him close the door. And I'm like, okay, so the guy's still in handcuffs. Yeah, he's still in handcuffs. But basically secure him in this door and let somebody else handle it. And then, let's go over here. That's,
right.
The gist of it. And so once we got him secured, the guy's still in my handcuffs. So I leave my handcuffs that I bought personally that were my favorite handcuffs. I leave it on him and leave him in the jail. And so I go running out of the jail as well. And there's lock boxes on the wall, and you put your gun and your knives and your taser and aspeton and everything. You put it in the lockbox because you can't take it in the jail. So I had to run back to the lockbox and get all my equipment out, and then get to my patrol car. And the deputy's like, hey, I'll follow you. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm trying to get my databases back up, turn my internet back on my computer so I can find out where the address is actually at so I could start driving there. So we get to the gate to be let out of the Sallyport area, and it opens up, and the deputy is ahead of me, and he just starts driving, and so I'm following him thinking like maybe he knows where he's going. And it didn't seem like he knew, so I went around him once I was able to get the address and everything, and got from Jonesboro to Rex. It was probably 14, 15 miles away. The call was so. It was a long ride just to get there, running lights and sirens. It was a pretty good little drive. So when I initially showed up, let me back up real quick. When I was on the way, I still really didn't know what was going on, other than the fact that people told me there were shots fired and an officer was in trouble. They needed help. So okay, I don't need to know very much more. I'm on the way. Right. I'm coming regardless. But I heard on the radio there was a lieutenant that was working, and that lieutenant said if there's any SWAT operators working, we need you to get here now. So basically, you know, that means if you're not doing something that's important and you have to be there and you're a SWAT operator, we need you. So that basically
drop everything
relieves you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that basically relieves you of whatever duty that you're doing at that point in time, because, you know, we have SWAT operators that are detectives. They don't handle patrol stuff. So instead of investigating the crime you're investigating right now, hey, you're relieved of that right now. We need you to go over here. So I already knew that it had escalated to the point where they're like already asking for the SWAT team.
Yeah.
Which was very quickly, you know, that happened very quickly. And so I'm like, okay, something bad definitely happened. So I get there, and there was an intersection on a big state route that was completely shut down. There was just cop cars everywhere. So there's a ton of law enforcement agencies inside of our county. We have a county sheriff's office. We have a county police department. And then there's like 6 or 7 cities that have their own departments as well. So there's a lot of law enforcement agencies in our county. So there's a lot of cops. And so there was, you know, patrol cars from every department pretty much almost in our county. And they were just everywhere. And it was kind of chaotic. So the intersection to the neighborhood going into where the call was completely shut down. And there was people standing around their cars, and there was patrol cars out there. So I thought that point was relatively close to the incident. So I get out of my car and open my trunk and unlock it, and I start taking off my normal patrol vest and my normal patrol duty belt, and put on my big heavy plate carrier, my helmet, and my other duty belt that we wore on the SWAT team. And so I'm getting ready. I'm preparing myself, hooking my radio up, putting it in the pouch, putting my ear pro on, my helmet, putting it on, and everything. And so I grab my rifle, and I take off running down the road to the neighborhood. And there was a couple fire trucks actually that was parked on the main road. And still, I'm following the trail of blue and red lights, you know, down the road. So I'm like, if I just run this way, it's got to be over here somewhere. And the fire department was like, hey, man, the house is like 3/4 of a mile down the street. Like you might want to.
That's a long run with all of that gear.
Yeah, with all that on. Yeah, they're like, you might want to just get in your car and drive further down. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So I get back in the car, and I drive down into another intersection where there was a lot of police presence, and I walk up, and my adrenaline's already starting to go because I know something bad happened. And we're about to walk into this environment. And I remember I'm walking up with my rifle, and I'm in my equipment and everything. And there was a police officer. And I vaguely, like, I remember seeing them, but I don't remember who it was. And I don't remember seeing, you know, a name tag or anything. But the first question out of my mouth was, hey, where is Laxon at? Which was my best friend. And he and I were on the SWAT team together. And someone pointed to like a pickup truck in a driveway, and it was like, hey, they're over there. So he was already staged up with some of the other guys that were on duty and were SWAT operators. So I ran over to them and kind of got a gist of what happened. So basically what happened is there was some kind of domestic incident, and a guy had shot his son, who was 13, I believe, at the time, shot him in the face. He executed his sister in the front yard of the neighbor's house. And then later we learned that there was actually a deceased older female inside the home. So 2 people had been shot. We knew one was dead. which was his sister. They were able to get his son. He was walking down the street and holding his face basically until he had encountered a cop going to the call for service and kind of flagged him down and, was able to tell them what happened and give a brief description of what his father was wearing and everything. And so the patrol officers get to the point where they can actually see his sister in the front yard of that house, and they run over to try to provide aid to her, assess her, hey, is she still alive, and then try to treat her and get some attention on her gunshot wounds and everything. And while they were doing that, the houses were really close together, and the suspect came out of the house that he lived at and started shooting in the direction of the patrol officers who were now providing aid to his sister that he had executed. And so that was the initial prompt to get officers to their location. That's when they needed help. Was the guy came out and was shooting at them, which made them have to change positions, find some cover, because she's in the front yard of the house and they're really exposed. And they're being met with gunfire while their attention was already diverted to something else. So they really I don't think they really had a true understanding of where he was and what the threat was at that time. So they had to basically regroup and find cover, and then start assessing from there, because they're if you want to think about the OODA loop part of it, scientifically, their attention's diverted to something else, and then they're being met with a life or death situation, and they got to regroup. So that's when they put the stress call out on the radio and started getting some resources to them. And so at that point, when I showed up, there wasn't a whole lot of information yet. So they, obviously it didn't even get to the point where they were investigating what happened. They were trying to render aid to someone who was dying and was met with gunfire. So there wasn't a whole lot of information to be had, not to discredit the actions of the patrol officers that were there that night, but there was just not enough information to be obtained anyway. You have a 13-year-old kid who can only intelligently articulate so much to the patrol officers, and maybe he didn't even know a full understanding of why this happened to him either, and he needed medical attention, so he was taken out of the area anyway. So it's not like they could sit there and interview him and get all the facts. Like, he needed to go be treated for a gunshot wound to the face, was pretty serious. And so there just wasn't a whole lot of information, and the patrol officers thought that he had ran into the woods, and the last time that he exchanged fire with them, they thought he was in the woods. So that was our initial information, was when I showed up, was, hey, we think he's in the woods, and he's been shooting at us. And that's when I learned, like, from the initial call where that guy was asking me, what does this code means? The person who lived at the house where his sister was executed called the police and said, yo, somebody's dead in my, front yard. This person just got shot in my front yard. Yeah. So that's how this whole thing started happening. And so we're trying to game plan what we were going to do, and we're actually trying to figure out where the incident location was in relation to where we were, because we were not on the street of the call. We were inside of the perimeter that the patrol officers had established to basically surround the area of where this suspect was and limit his ability to escape this area, kind of contain him. So there was, I can't remember who it was from the team, but they took their visible laser for their rifle and started circling a house, like, hey, I think it's this house right here. And so, one of our team leaders was like, all right, well, let's go behind some of these houses, use them as like concealment, and we'll move up till we can get a better vantage point on that house, because we're probably 200 yards away from the house that someone thought the incident location was anyway. So we go behind some houses, use them as cover, and come up to the back corner of a house that was pretty much perpendicular to the house they thought it was. And so when we got there, there was a guy, a civilian, hiding behind a trash can. Like, you roll out to the driveway and the trash truck comes, picks your garbage can up, And so he's hiding behind the trash can, outside of the perimeter, looking at the perimeter officers, and he's fumbling. We're still pretty far away from them, probably 60, 70 yards, and it's dark. It's like 9 o'clock at night, 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. So it's relatively dark. We can't really tell what he's fumbling with on the ground. And but he was on one knee, and he matched the description we were given by patrol of what the suspect was wearing and everything. So we were like, hey, is this the guy? Like, is this who we're looking for? But we don't know. But our dispatcher told us that she had someone who called in to 911 and knew where the suspect was. And right before we got to the back of the house, she updated us and said that there was a caller that knows where the suspect is. So we're trying to get information from dispatch. We're relaying like, hey, can you confirm with the caller, is this guy we're looking at behind, is he currently hiding behind a trash can? So we're trying to get that confirmation, yes or no. And he matched the description. And he was just acting very hinky anyway. And so he had all of our attention because he matched the description, his mannerisms and behavior, and the fact that he was hiding behind this trash can like he was not trying to be seen, and he's outside of our perimeter. It definitely was like, this may be our guy. So we could never get that confirmation, yes or no, this is the suspect or not. So at one point, we had a couple patrolmen that were with us that we felt were competent enough to kind of run with us until we get the rest of the team and our armored vehicle and some of our other equipment with us. We kind of have to substitute that with some patrolmen. And we had a little bit too big of a team right there on the corner of the house, and everybody wanted to look around the corner, to see what was going on. So at one point he saw us, behind that house, and we recognized that like our position was now not of an advantage anymore. So we decided
not good, right?
Yeah. Now he knows where we are, and we don't know if he's got a gun. So now we decided to actually deal with him as a possible threat because of all of the details I explained, like of his mannerisms and his just physical description and everything. And so we moved up together like online and started giving him commands to get on the ground, which he started complying with. And he started, laying down on the ground, and now we have this element of like a mixture between like SWAT operators and patrol officers, and we're having him crawl to us on his stomach, and he's complying at this point. So we're like, what? He's, the guy we're looking for is shooting at the police. He's shot a couple people, but he's just, okay, well, maybe this show of, force is working. Well, as we're literally dealing with him and he's crawling towards us, dispatch gets on the radio and says that the caller who knows where the suspect is just called again and said that the suspect is walking out of the house now. He's wearing all red, and he's walking down the street with a gun. So we're like, okay, the physical description had changed because at first he was wearing all black. Yeah. Now they're saying all red. The guy we're dealing with is wearing all red. All black. And we have been observing him for the past 5 minutes or so. He didn't just come out of the house, and he doesn't have a gun. So maybe this is not our guy. So our team leader at that point in time said, hey, give me 2 guys. We're going to push up to the next cross street and see if we can interdict this person that they're saying is walking down the street. Mm-hmm. So me and my best friend volunteered to be the 2 guys that go with him. So we broke off from that element, and we took off in a dead sprint, kind of at an angle from where we were, which led into the backyard of the houses that was, basically the next street up. And at the first house on the corner, we ran around it, and so now we're in between these two houses. And when we came around the corner, I could see the guy walking down the street, and he was walking like from my right to left, walking down the sidewalk, and he was wearing all red. And I immediately started calling out like, "Hey, there he is, there he is." So we moved up in between these two houses, which were probably, I don't know, 25 feet apart from each other. Like they were like just right on top of each other. And so I ended up being on the far left. My team leader was in the middle. My buddy, Officer Laxton, was on the far right side. And then there was a guy who's assigned to our Marshals Task Force, who works for us, is assigned with the Marshals, was behind Laxton. So we pushed up together, and it got to a point where like the wall of the house that's to my left took out my view of him, because he's walking down the street to the left, and now I have this wall that's, further in front of me and goes around. He walked past the corner, so I couldn't see him anymore, but I saw, like in my peripheral, I saw Officer Laxton drop down to a knee, and then our Marshals TFO guy come over the top of him, and I heard Laxton start giving him commands, "Let me see your hands, let me see your hands." I remember hearing that, and then just a volley of gunfire, but I can't see him now. Like, I don't know where he is exactly.
Right.
So I hear the volley of gunfire, and my team leader and Laxton start shooting, and then Denard, our task force officer. So I hear all this gunfire, and I'm still moving up to the corner of the house, and I see Laxton, like, I heard him say, "I'm hit." And then in my peripheral vision, I could see him like rolling over to his side, like rolling out of the way. So I get up to the corner of the house, and I start pieing around the corner. And now I find the suspect. He had basically ran from in front of the house, and now he's ran to the opposite corner on the front of the house. He's hiding behind a tree, and the porch light on the house was on, and in between the houses was very dark. And so for him to look over to where we were, he was basically looking in that bright porch light, and I had no light behind me, so I wasn't backlit at all, so he couldn't see me at all, and I knew that. So I used it to my advantage, to get an accurate, put my sights on him, and then I turned my flashlight on my rifle and started giving him commands while I'm already dialed into him. And so if he did anything aggressively towards me, I'm already in a position of advantage. And as soon as I started giving him commands to get on the ground and let me see your hands, he stepped around the tree and started raising his hand up. And had a pistol in his hand. So we exchanged gunfire at each other, and he took off running. And so I'm thinking, like, did I miss completely? Like, I took the time to get dialed in on this guy and have the upper hand and everything, and he just took off running like nothing happened. And for whatever reason, like, I can't explain it to this day, and I wish there was something that I knew that I could tell other people so they could maybe recognize in the situation and know, but something just clicked in my head when he took off running. It wasn't anything he did specifically, but I knew that what he was going to do was run around the house and try to come up behind us and basically flank us. And so I recognized that as soon as he took off running, before he made it to the corner of the house, I started calling out, "Hey, he's trying to flank us." Well, I had no idea at the time that once the gunfire had ceased initially between like the three officers and the suspect at that point, the two other officers grabbed Laxton and started dragging him to the back of the house, and I'm still working up to the corner trying to get in the fight. And so I had no idea that they were actually, dragging him back. So when I called out, he's trying to flank us, they're already behind the house and they're providing aid to him, trying to, basically save him. I had no idea because I'm focused on doing my job, Right. And so when I called out, he's trying to flank us. I pulled off of that corner, ran behind me, got to the next corner, and I was basically trying to cut him off before he was able to come up behind us. And as I'm pieing that corner, he came around the corner just in a dead sprint. And as soon as he rounded the corner, he just threw up and in a dead sprint, just threw the gun up, shot one time, and it hit me in the hand. And it made me it scared the crap out of me. So it made me drop the rifle basically. Yeah. And I had it slung, but I dropped it. Cause I'm like, what was that? And,
just got shot in the hand. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm down on one knee and now I don't have my rifle in my hand. So I'm like, okay, I gotta do something to preserve my own life. So I started crawling backwards and regrouping and pick my rifle back up. And as I'm picking my rifle back up, I could hear gunfire from basically my left and kind of behind me. So I stood in place and just, held my rifle at the corner. If he comes around the corner at me, I'll be able to re-engage him. But because people are shooting from kind of behind me and to my left, I didn't want to move too far forward and put myself in crossfire. So I just held where I was and just waited to see if he was coming around the corner or not, because he was running in a dead sprint. He was determined to get to where we were. I fully expected him to come running around the corner at me, and but he didn't. And so I started crawling to my left to stay behind the gunfire from my other officers, but get a different vantage point to see where he's at, what's going on. And so by that time, I'm starting to crawl out to my left. I see basically his feet laying on the ground, sticking up in the air, and his legs, across the ground. So I'm like, okay, he's down. And I keep pieing a little bit more and see he's not moving, and the gunfire stopped. So I'm like, all right, he's down. Officers started coming from the perimeter and coming. Everyone wanted to come help because a gunfight was going on, and we had put out the downed officer call on the radio. So everybody wants to come in and help. And as I started seeing officers move up to take the suspect in custody, people started coming closer to where I was, and I'm like, hey, I'm hit. So some people came over to me, and they got a tourniquet on my arm, and they took the suspect in custody. And I was kind of, I'm going to say, out of it a little bit, but I started calling out for Laxton. I'm like, where is Laxton at? And I could see him on the ground. I'm looking at him, but I just kept saying, where's Laxton at? So they there's a guy grabbed me and kind of was like, hey man, he's fine. They're working on him. He's going to be okay. Let's get you to the ambulance. And as bad as I wanted to stay there, with him, there's nothing that I know that the other two SWAT operators that are there don't know that they can't do. So there's nothing that I can do for him that they're not already doing. And my hands shot up too. So I need to go get seen about as well. So I start walking out of the area. They put me in the back of a patrol car that was close by. I took my vest off and everything, and got in the back of the car, and they drove me to where the ambulances were staged up. And I didn't know this at the time, but the ambulance they put me in, they had already pulled the gurney out of it, the stretcher. They already pulled the stretcher out of the ambulance, and it was on the sidewalk. And I remember now, looking back, I remember passing the gurney, but I get in this ambulance, and it's kind of important in a minute, but I see the gurney, and it doesn't hit me that I'm getting into this ambulance that doesn't have a gurney. So now I'm sitting on the bench seat inside the ambulance, and they're looking at my hand and everything. So as they're starting to assess me, and the ambulance doors open up from the back. You know, there's a side door in an ambulance, and then there's the back double doors. I went in the side door. The back, the double doors were closed. Well, all of a sudden the double doors open, and the gurney starts being wheeled in. Well, my best friend is on the gurney, and they're putting the gurney.
Laxton, right?
Yeah. So they're putting the gurney in the ambulance. Well, now they've already cut his shirt off, and he's not moving. And I'm sitting there trying to be assessed, but my best friend now is the first time that I've seen him with clear eyes and in actual ambient light. And he had throw up down his neck and his chest. Mm-hmm. And it was odd because there wasn't a whole lot of blood. Like, he wasn't bleeding heavily. It was all a bunch of internal stuff, you know. Yeah. And so he wasn't moving, and I knew it wasn't good. It couldn't be good because he's not moving, and he had vomited on himself and stuff. I'm like, that's not good. And so the ambulance crew was like, hey, we need to get you out of this ambulance. We got to put you in the other one. And I'm like, okay. So I get up and get into the next ambulance, and they're put me on the actual gurney of that ambulance, and just start cutting my shirt off and assessing me and everything. And I could hear on their radio, one of the medics on the other ambulance that was, you know, working on Laxton, they said, I heard him say, we're working a code on one officer. And that means a code is basically cardiac arrest. And I'm like,
his heart stopped beating.
Yeah, no, you're not. No, you're not. You can't be. There's no way. Not him. Not Laxton. I just kept saying that over and over. Like, no, you're not. No, you're not. You're not. You can't be. No, you're not. And so we get taken to two separate hospitals. They took him to the closest local hospital to try to stabilize him before they could move him to level 1 trauma care. And then they took me straight to a trauma hospital because I was stable and everything. So I spent many hours in the hospital getting x-rays and stitches in my hand. And, there's a bunch of people came up from other agencies just showing their support to us. And that's kind of like the thing, you know, if you see that on the news all the time, if there's a down officer that goes to the hospital, you know, you see on the news, there's just a sea of patrol cars with their lights on, just you know, showing support for that officer and stuff. So there was a lot of officers from my department that was at the hospital and surrounding agencies and stuff, and people going back and forth from checking on me to driving an hour south to check on Laxton and everything. And, so there was a sergeant.
So can you just, I was going to say, when did you learn that Officer Laxton passed?
Right now, that's what I was getting into. So there was a sergeant that was in my my trauma room, and he was actually the sergeant who I got in the back of his car when they drove me to the ambulance, and he escorted my ambulance to the hospital. So he was in the in my trauma room, and minutes after me just being in the trauma room, it's just me and him, and I'm like, is Laxton gone? And he said, yeah. And I just broke down and, you know, just hysterically.
You lost it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I lost it. I was just hysterically crying, and you know, with my parents living out of state, that, you know, it's hard to get in touch with them sometimes anyway, because there's a time difference between here and there. And and I have a history of breaking cell phones on duty. So this particular night, I took my cell phones out of my pocket and put them on the dash of my patrol car because I've broken or lost so many phones that I probably keep my cell provider in service, you know, just buying new phones. And So, I didn't have my cell phones. They were in my patrol car. I had no way to call my parents and stuff. And there's not too many people at work. There's a couple people that know my parents and have their numbers and, know how to communicate with them, but they weren't there. So I didn't really know how I was going to communicate with people. So I told another one of my best friends from the team, hey, call my wife, like call her, let her know what's going on. Make sure she knows, what's going on. Because this was pretty early in our relationship. I mean, her and I had only been dating for I want to say 8 months or so, and so I didn't really have a whole lot of conscious thought that I had. Like, I didn't have the room for a whole lot of thought. It's just like, hey, call her, let her know what happened. But I'm suffocating in the grief of, now I know my friend's dead, and I don't know what's going on with my hand. And I know another police officer who was shot in the hand and basically couldn't, as I understand it, couldn't return
to duty, right?
So now all these things are in my head. I'm like, am I going to be able to be a cop anymore? Because I get a lot of fulfillment out of doing my job, and it means a lot to me to do this job. And there's just so many thoughts and emotions going through my head. And so they were able to get in contact with my wife, and then somebody was able to get in touch with my parents. And my dad actually called the hospital, and I was able to talk to my dad on the charge nurse's desk phone. It's the old school phone that it's cordless, but it sits on the cradle or whatever. That's still what they use at the hospital. So this phone gets brought to me, and they're like, here. So I'm like, hello, and it's my dad. He's like, hey, are you okay? And so I was able to talk to him briefly before it was time to do x-rays and all this other stuff. So that's how I was able to actually talk to my parents, was on the charge nurse's desk phone. And the rest is pretty much history. Obviously he succumbed to his injuries in the hospital. Didn't make it. My wife and stepdaughter made it up to the hospital and was able to see them and stuff.
Yeah, Alex, you described your valor. You described your best friend's valor that night on the in that responding to that call. But I also know this isn't the first friend that you've lost in the line of duty, and that you lost Officer Wallace back in 2015. And so for you, man, this is not the first. And it hurts every time, but when it's the second time and it's somebody that's that close to you, it's really hard to get over it.
Yeah.
I want to point out to the listeners that you received the Medal of Valor for this, which is the highest award that the local police department can give to an officer in your line of work for what you did. And I think, based on what you've described, not only do you deserve it, but man, I just want to tell you personally, thank you for the commitment that you've made to serving and protecting people. Because if it wasn't for you, there'd be a whole lot more situations like this.
Yeah,
and I'd like to ask you to just kind of wrap this episode up by letting the listeners know the quality of guys and gals that are out there serving their community, like you and like Officer Wallace, like Officer Laxon, who not just are willing to put their lives on the line, but every day are trying to make society a better place. And the news doesn't tell you the good stories. They only tell you the bad stories right now. So can you kind of wrap this thing up by letting the listener know the kind of people that are out there serving and making this their communities all over the nation and perhaps around the world, making their communities a better place? I feel like that's the best way to wrap up the story that you just described.
Yeah, I mean, I serve. I take my job seriously. I take a lot of pride in what I do, and I always
And
treat people.
I'm going to
Go ahead.
pause you for just a second, Alex. I need to interrupt because I think there are some people that are saying, wait a second, did Alex go back to the force? Did Alex continue to serve? And because you just used a present tense verb, I know the answer to this, but there are some people that are asking the question, Alex, are you still serving? Can you go ahead and answer that question as you describe this for them?
Yeah, so I am still currently serving. I was put on administrative leave for the shooting incident, and like I said, there's a whole investigation that has to happen because I was involved in the shooting. Someone lost their life that night, and so there's an investigation that has to happen. Even though it was, it's kind of annoying because we were just trying to preserve life that night, and my best friend ended up dying, and all these people ended up dying that night. 3 people died, and 2 people were shot that are still living, like me and his son. And we actually have the same first name, which is weird. Our names are just spelled differently, and our names are unique. Like it's not a common, like Alex, yes, but I go by my middle name, and his first name is my middle name, and it's kind of a unique name. So it's just kind of peculiar that it's just spelled differently, but we have the same name. And so anyway, I was put on admin leave. I did a little bit of recovery and rehab stuff, and so I was out for about 3 months, and I was going absolutely stir crazy in my house. Yeah. So, and I think the best way I've been able to describe it, like how I was feeling it in that moment or in that space of time, was I just felt like a 20-ounce Coke bottle that somebody had just shaken up and then sat down on the table and just walked away from it. So now, like, all these emotions, everything's just, oh yeah. It's just it was a lot of pressure, inside. This guy had all these, I was mad, I was angry, that this happened to my best friend and everything, but yeah, I did rehab and some physical therapy stuff, and was out for about 3 months. And when they were able to, well, actually, because I was still working out at the time, like it sounds stupid and cliche to say, but I took 1 day off from the gym after everything happened, and then the day after that, I was in the gym working out again, and I just told myself, like, you have to prepare for the next one. You have to keep training for the next time that this is like gonna happen, because the realization was, for me, being in the Metro Atlanta area on a SWAT team in the Metro Atlanta area, this situation was likely to, yeah, again and again. And it's not if, it's when. And so it was it's kind of barbaric to think back on and say, like, that was my mentality, like, oh, I'm training for the next battle. But I will say something that helped me out was actually having that mentality. And then when I started actual therapy, that was my mentality, was, my therapist was asking me, what do you want, to get out of this? And or what are you what's the most thing that you're most concerned with? And it was like, the next time this happens, I want to be able to perform again and be in a good mindset. And it's just funny how that was my mentality to get better. And then a week after I went back to work, almost to the day, we got shot at again on the SWAT team. So
yeah, Alex, I think the best way to wrap this whole episode up is for just allowing you to describe for the listener the quality of the guy or the gal that's out there serving and protecting them. Because the news doesn't always tell the good stories. In fact, the news is really focused on the bad stories, but they don't tell you the many, many good stories. So can we just wrap this thing up by you letting the listener know the kind of people that are out there serving and protecting in law enforcement to make sure that they're able to sleep safe tonight?
Yeah, I mean, I hate that the media portrays us as being like bullies, like we just go out and just bully society, and
right.
That's not accurate at all.
Not at all.
Yeah,
agreed totally.
You have to acknowledge that there's some bad apples, or there is bad apples in our profession, and shouldn't be there. But I take a lot of pride in my job, and I always treat people with respect. And I always think, like, if the person I'm encountering, if it was my family and an officer had to encounter them, how would I want that officer to present himself, treat my family, and everything? So no matter if I encounter someone that was older than me or younger than me, it didn't matter. Male or female, it was yes ma'am, no ma'am, yes sir, no sir. It was very polite. I was very professional and polite and courteous to everyone. And I'm not an anomaly. I'm not the only one that does this job like that. I serve with officers who have the same mentality I do. And actually that mentality of treat people how you would want your family treated is actually like, it's actually a core value of my department that is actually written in writing, that's how our chief wants us to portray ourselves to civilian population. So there's departments that have this mentality. There's officers that have this mentality. I mean, I've gotten the chance to work with some of the most incredible human beings I've ever met in my life. And the people I work with genuinely care about the good of society and taking care of people and protecting the quality of life, preservation of life.
Yeah. Well, Alex, I get the honor of interviewing some incredible human beings, and I include in that list now you, because you described multiple times during this interview when other guys were running to the gunfire, when you're running to the gunfire, which is definitely not normal in human society. And I just want to tell you, man, I thank God for you and the guys and gals that you serve with, to know that there are people like you when something bad happens and I call 911, to know that there's somebody like you that's going to treat people with respect, but's also going to run to the sound of the guns instead of running away from it. And thank you, man, thank you for what you've done for the country while serving in the National Guard. Thank you for what you continue to do for your community, serving as a law enforcement officer.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I mean, that means a lot, coming from you especially.
It's been great to have you on this episode, man, and I can't wait for people to get a chance to hear this incredible story.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Can you tell now why I am such a big fan of law enforcement as well as the military? Imagine the courage that it took for Alex to run to the gunfight, to crawl closer to the gunfight, to even while he is being shot in the hand, to continue to respond and protect people around him. Wow, what an incredible story. And I just want to thank Alex once again, not only for being my guest, but for continuing to serve after all that he's been through, continuing to serve and protect his community. There's some pretty amazing people that are on this podcast, but there's also a lot of really amazing people that listen to this podcast. And I want to take a moment and highlight one of the guests. The fan of the week for this episode of Unbeatable is Mike Benjamin. Mike, I just want to tell you, you're amazing. And thank you for being such a faithful, loyal fan to this episode. Hey guys, if you started listening to this broadcast for the first time and you're not already following us on your favorite podcast platform, why don't you go ahead and subscribe? We're on all of the major podcast platforms. You can actually watch the video if you want on YouTube as well. But I also just want you to know that I have prepared a little video It's actually a real motivational video, and it's there to help you get through some of the worst nights, some of the most dangerous or difficult circumstances of your life. And if you want that motivational video, I'll give it to you totally free. All you need to do to be able to watch it is simply become part of the Unbeatable Army. That's our list of people that stay connected and I communicate with throughout the week. You want to be part of this Unbeatable Army? Just go to unbeatablearmy.com. Thanks for joining me for this incredible story from Alex Chandler on Unbeatable. See you next time.